Picture a first-century street corner in Corinth. A traveling preacher stands before a mixed crowd of Jews and Greeks, and he's saying something that makes them recoil in disgust. "We preach Christ crucified. To the Jews, this is blasphemy. To the Greeks, utter foolishness. A crucified God. The very idea is scandalous. Yet this message, this stumbling block, this foolishness would reshape human history." This is the story of how an Anglican theologian named John Stott helped a modern world rediscover why the cross stands at the very center of Christian faith. In 1986, John Stott, rector emeritus of All Souls Church in London, published what many consider his magnum opus. Stott wasn't writing from an ivory tower. For decades, he'd watched Western culture drift from its Christian moorings, seen churches water down their message, and observed how even believers grew uncomfortable with the stark reality of the cross. The cross had become a piece of jewelry, an architectural ornament, anything but what it actually was: the brutal execution of God incarnate. Stott wrote The Cross of Christ to restore this central truth to its rightful place, not as one doctrine among many, but as the foundation of everything Christians believe. Stott begins with a bold claim: authentic Christianity is cross-centered Christianity. Look at how the New Testament writers obsess over those 6 hours on Golgotha. The Gospels devote a third of their narratives to Jesus' final week. Paul can't write a letter without circling back to the cross. Peter, John, the writer of Hebrews, all fixate on this moment. Why? Because Stott argues the cross isn't just the climax of Jesus' earthly ministry. It's the hinge of human history, the moment when God's eternal purpose breaks into time. Everything before the cross points forward to it. Everything after flows from it. Remove the cross, and Christianity collapses into just another moral philosophy. But why does there need to be a cross at all? Stott takes us deep into what he calls the problem of forgiveness. We moderns think forgiveness should be easy, automatic. Someone wrongs us, we shrug it off, everyone moves on. But Stott shows how this trivializes both sin and love. Picture a judge who simply waves away crimes because he's a nice guy. We wouldn't call that justice, we'd call it corruption. Now here's the tension. The God revealed in Scripture is both perfectly holy and perfectly loving. His holiness means he cannot simply ignore sin, cannot pretend evil doesn't matter. His love means he cannot simply destroy sinners, cannot abandon the creatures he made in his image. How can God be both just and the justifier of sinners? This is the riddle the cross solves. Here Stott introduces the book's most revolutionary idea, the self-substitution of God. Throughout history, humans have tried to bridge the gap between themselves and the divine. Ancient religions offered sacrifices, animals bearing the guilt of the people. But Stott shows how Christianity flips this script entirely. It's not humans offering something to God. It's God offering himself for humans. On the cross, God doesn't send a substitute. God becomes the substitute. The Father doesn't spare his Son. The Son freely gives himself, and the Father, in giving the Son, gives himself. This isn't some pagan story of an angry deity demanding blood. This is the astonishing claim that the one offended by sin is the same one who bears sin's penalty. Stott carefully unpacks the doctrine of penal substitutionary atonement, knowing it's fallen out of favor in many circles. Critics call it cosmic child abuse, a relic of primitive religion. Stott responds by showing how this doctrine actually reveals God's character. The word satisfaction doesn't mean God needs to be appeased like an angry tyrant. It means God's holy nature must be honored, his moral law upheld. Sin isn't just a mistake. It's rebellion against the Creator, a cosmic treason that fractures reality itself. The penalty is death, separation from the source of life. But watch what God does. He satisfies his own justice by absorbing the penalty himself. The punishment falls on the Son, who is himself God. Divine love satisfies divine holiness. The cross demonstrates that God takes sin more seriously than we ever could, and loves us more deeply than we ever dared imagine. What does the cross actually accomplish? Stott identifies 3 achievements, starting with salvation. Because of the cross, we're justified, declared righteous, brought from death to life. But Stott pushes beyond legal categories. He explores how the cross reconciles, how it brings peace between God and humanity, how it tears down the dividing wall of hostility. Think of the vertical dimension, our broken relationship with God healed, and the horizontal dimension, our broken relationships with each other being restored. The cross doesn't just change our legal status before God, it changes everything. We're adopted into God's family, given the Spirit, brought into union with Christ Himself. Salvation isn't just forgiveness, it's transformation, the beginning of new creation. Second, the cross reveals. It's theology in wood and nails, God's nature displayed in shocking clarity. Look at the cross and you see the depth of human sin. We're capable of rejecting perfect love, of murdering our Creator. There's no room for sentimentality about human nature when you stand before Golgotha. But look again, and you see the height of divine love. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. The cross reveals God's wisdom too, solving the impossible riddle of justice and mercy. And it reveals God's power, not the power of coercion, but the power of self-giving love, the power that overcomes evil by absorbing it. Third, the cross conquers. Stott shows how the New Testament writers use martial language, describing the cross as a battlefield where God defeats His enemies. But which enemies? Not Rome, not the Jews. The real foes are more fundamental: sin, death, the devil, the powers of darkness. How does crucifixion become victory? Because in dying, Jesus breaks death's power. In being cursed, He removes the curse of the law. In bearing sin, He exhausts its penalty. The one who appeared defeated actually triumphed, making a public spectacle of the spiritual forces arrayed against humanity. The resurrection proves it. The tomb is empty. Death has been swallowed up in victory. And because Jesus lives, everyone united to Him will live also. But Stott doesn't let us remain spectators. The cross, he insists, must shape how we live. If Jesus saved us by self-giving love, then self-giving love must mark His followers. This isn't optional. The cross becomes our pattern, our ethic, our way of being in the world. What does this look like? It means embracing weakness rather than grasping for power. It means choosing suffering service over self-promotion. It means loving enemies, not just friends. It means seeing every person, no matter how marginalized, as someone for whom Christ died. The cross undermines every worldly value system. Our obsession with success, our worship of strength, our endless self-assertion. Paul says it plainly, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Stott wrote in 1986, but his words feel urgent for today. He saw how modern culture values comfort over sacrifice, how we demand rights without responsibilities, how we seek a Christianity that makes no demands. The cross challenges all of it. It confronts our therapeutic gospel that promises health and wealth. It exposes our moralistic reduction of faith to being nice. It questions our triumphalism, our desire for a Christianity of glory without suffering. Stott calls us back to what he calls cruciformity, a life shaped by the cross. This isn't morbid or life-denying. It's the path Jesus Himself walked, and He called it abundant life. The grain of wheat that falls and dies bears much fruit. We return to where we started, the scandal of the cross. For ancient Greeks, crucifixion was foolishness because they prized wisdom and power. A suffering God? Absurd. For ancient Jews, crucifixion was a stumbling block because Torah said anyone hung on a tree was cursed. A cursed Messiah? Impossible, but Paul gloried in the scandal. God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. The cross turns all human values upside down. What looks like defeat is victory. What looks like weakness is strength. What looks like death is life. And this strange, scandalous message has the power to save all who believe. The cross of Christ became a modern classic, translated into dozens of languages, read by millions. Stott's blend of biblical depth, theological precision, and pastoral warmth helped a generation recover the centrality of the cross. He showed that rigorous thinking and warm devotion aren't enemies, but allies. Decades later, the book remains essential reading, A reminder that Christianity stands or falls with what happened on that hill outside Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Because the cross isn't just a moment in history. It's the key to all history, the lens through which we see God, ourselves, and the world clearly. The Apostle Paul put it simply, "I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified." John Stott spent his life unpacking what that means, and in the cross of Christ, he invites us to stand beneath those wooden beams and let them reshape everything. The scandal endures. But for those with eyes to see, it's the scandal of grace, the foolishness wiser than human wisdom, the weakness stronger than human strength. It's the place where God's holy love meets human sinful rebellion and love wins, not by force but by sacrifice, not by power but by substitution, not by avoiding suffering but by entering into it, bearing it, and transforming it from within. This is the cross of Christ. This is the heart of the gospel. This is the hope of the world.